This is lesson 1, negation, conjunction, and disjunction. So a statement is any sentence with a truth value, true or false, but it can't be both. And we're going to use letters to represent the statements. So in this example, let C represent Henry as a climber, and let S represent James as a swimmer. So when we do negation of statements, what this does is it changes the truth value. So in other words, if it was true, then it turns to false, and if it was false, then it turns to true. And how it does that is it just puts the not in there. Okay. So the not symbol is like that squiggly symbol. So negation, the word negate or negative comes in that word. So that just means make it negative or the not. So that's a good way to remember it. So what is the negation of variable C, which represented Henry is a climber? That would be not C, we would write it. And that translates to Henry is not a climber, is not a climber. Okay, that's it. They're just statements. So if Henry is a climber, so if C is true, what would be the truth value of not C? Okay, so I did kind of say this before. So not C would be false, and we're going to put F for false, right? Because C was true. I'll put T for true and F for false. So because C was true, then the opposite, right? The negation of C, the opposite of true is false. So what is the negation of James is not a swimmer? So up here, right? So we're going to assume that James is a swimmer, is true statement, okay? So James is not a swimmer. So we're going to represent James is not a swimmer as not J, right? Because James is a swimmer, so not J is you just stick in not, that's all. So we're going to do the negation of that. So we're going to do not J. So in other words, James is not a swimmer. So in other words, the not kind of like cancels out. So the opposite, so think of just opposite. So James is a swimmer would be the negation of that. Okay. So think of it as like an algebra, negative 2 would turn to positive 2. So the opposite of James is not a swimmer is James is a swimmer. Okay. So you're just going to be either, that's why it says up here, you're going to either insert or remove the word not. So in this case, we removed the word not. So right here it says, right, so the rule is the negation of the statement is the opposite truth value. So that's super important. Okay, so the truth table, we only have one variable here. So the only options we have is if variable P would be true or it would be false. Okay, those are the only two options. So in that case, not P in row number 1, that would have to be false. And if P was false, then not P would have to be true. So that's how we'd fill in that table. So we're going to do that a little bit later when we have multiple variables, not just one variable, in this case, P. So Roman numeral 3. So we're going to discuss the similarities and differences of the following two sentences. Okay, so for your quarterly exam, you must bring a pen and a pencil. And number 2, for your quarterly exam, you must bring a pen or a pencil. So what would be some of the differences of the two sentences? So it turns out that over here for the and is it's just one option. And over here, it's going to be 3 options. And what do I mean by options? I mean by truth. So it turns out, right, if your teacher says you must bring a pen and a pencil, so in other words, that means you have to bring both, right? So you must bring both. As opposed to if your teacher says, okay, bring a pen or a pencil, where your 3 options is you either must bring a pen or a pencil, or you could even bring both, right? So those are the 3 options. That has to be true. Okay, so in math, the and is called conjunction. So we're going to look at the conjunction of two statements. And the or is going to be disjunction. Okay, the symbol in math for conjunction is like that caret symbol or the upside down V. and the disjunction symbol is just going to be the V. Okay, so definitely need to know that. All right, so on the next page, Roman numeral 4, right? So notice that I reminded you here that the caret symbol, that's conjunction. It's a compound statement formed by, so you're going to combine two statements with the word and. Okay, so notice instead of on the previous page, we just had one variable P. Now we have two variables, P and Q. Okay, so here are the two variables. So what are the options, right? What are all the different scenarios? Well, both P and Q could be true. P could be true and Q could be false, or P could be false and Q would be true, or they could both be false. Okay, so those are the options. So we talked about on the previous page that, just changing my colors here, that if you have a conjunction of two statements, you only have one option, right? So remember that pen and pencil, the truth value for the conjunction, if they're both true, would have to be true. Okay, so if you bring a pen and a pencil, that would be true. The rest are going to be false, right? So if you let P be a pencil, let's say, and Q be a pen, that would have to mean that you bring a pencil, but not a pen, right? It has to be both. So that would be false. The next one, it would be you don't bring a pencil, but you do bring a pen, right? That can't happen, right? And then definitely the last one would be false because that would be you don't bring anything at all, right? So notice that the only scenario that would produce a true value would be is that both statements need to be true. So it says that right here. So you do need to know that. Okay, so that's the rule. So to make a conjunction true, both statements need to be true. So disjunction, which is the symbol as just a V, so that is using the word or. So if we look at the same scenarios, right? So true, 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 false, false, true, and false, false, right? What would the disjunction of P and Q look like in each of the four scenarios? Well, remember the pen and the pencil argument, we had three values. So if we use, again, P for pencil and Q for pen, if you were to bring a pencil or a pen, right, that would mean that you bring both. So that would work. Or you could bring a pencil or a pen, right, but not a, or you could bring a pencil but not bring a pen. That could work. Or you could bring not bring a pencil, but bring a pen. That's true, right? And the last one is you don't bring anything at all. Well, that is going to be false, right? Because remember on the previous page, we said you could bring a pen or a pencil or both, okay? So this junction is different. The three scenarios where you're going to have truth values is, it says it right here, to make a disjunction true, either the statement must be true, either statement must be true or both can be true. Okay, so you do have to know the difference between disjunction and conjunction of two variables. So let's look at an example. So J is going to represent Jack is nimble, M is Mary had a little lamb, and S is Selma jumps over the moon. So we're going to convert the English sentences to logic language. So in other words, symbols and letters. So this is Mary had a little lamb, right? Remember that's M. And so that would be the caret symbol. And then Jack is not nimble. So J is Jack is nimble. So I would have to put squiggly J for Jack is not nimble. So that's all that we're doing. Okay. So the next one is Jack is not nimble. Okay. So again, that's going to be not J, or so that's going to be the V symbol. And then Mary did not have Mary did not have a little lamb. So M is Mary did have a little lamb. So that would mean not M would have to be not having a little lamb. Okay, so then Selma jumps over the moon, right? So that's S. And so that's the caret symbol. Jack is nimble. So that would be J. So you are going to just have to be able to convert sentences or premises into logic language. So I am not going to be going through every single one of these, but let's say you have 4 variables, P, Q, R, S. So there would have to be 16 different scenarios where you have true and false, right? So if we look at, for example, the first row is they all could be true. Or maybe the second option is PQR is true, but then S is false, right? Row number 3 is P and Q are true, but R could be false, and S could be true, right? So you could go on and on and on until we get to a scenario where then all of them are false. So to fill all of these out, right? So we're just going to do like a couple. Let me change this back to pencil mode. So for that first row, if all of them are true, then if we did the negation of all of them, then that means all of them are going to be false, right? And then we'll just do the second one. So P, Q, and R, the negation of those, since those are both all true, we're going to do all false for those. And then if S is false, then not S would be true, right? So you could just keep filling out the chart. So given, here's the given. P is true, or let me actually do a different color. Let me see. Let me do yellow is better. So P is true, Q is false, R is false, and S is true. So based on those premises, we're going to actually take a look at all of these. All right, so first things first, what we want to do is make a little key so we could easily refer back to it. Okay. So, okay. So it says P is true. So I'm going to do a little key, right? So I'm going to write P equals true for T for true. So we're going to do the negations of all of them. So that would mean not P would have to be false. Okay. So in the given, it says Q is false. So I'm going to put Q false. So not Q would be the opposite of false, which is true. Then the given says that R is false. Okay, so R is false. So then not R would have to be true. And then last but not least, it says that S is true. So then not S would be false. So first step is we're going to just substitute. That's it. That's all we're doing. Okay. So if we look at number 1, P, we're going to put the truth value as T. Then it says or not Q, right? If you look up in our key, you could see that we're going to put T for that. Okay, so T. So if you look at the, we already did. So that's the disjunction of 2 truth statements. So we already did that on the previous page, right? So for any of them that you see the disjunction, we're going to look here, right? So that would be the that first column there that we already did that. Okay, so we know that the disjunction of 2 true statements is true. So therefore our final answer would be true. Okay, so just like in algebra, when you see brackets or parentheses, you're going to group those and do those first, right? So just using substitution, so P was true, and then we're going to do the grouping first. So in our key, we see that not Q was true, so I'm going to write true. Copy down the or, and then S, if we look at our key, was true. Right? So order of operations, we're going to be doing the disjunction of 2 true statements, which we saw in number 1. We already know that answer was true. Right? And then we're just going to copy down, right? Just like an algebra order of operations. So now we have the conjunction of 2 true statements. So if we look at the very first chart that we did, that the only time we have a true statement for the conjunction is if both P and Q are true in general. So now we have another true answer. Okay, so I'm just going to do one more, and then I'm just going to move on. I'm not going to bother going through all of these. Okay, but you get the gist. Okay, so first things first, we're going to just, what was the word I'm looking for? Substitute, right? So we have R, the disjunction of R or R. So in parentheses, right? So R, if we look at our key, is false. So I'm going to put false or false, right? Then I'm going to copy and then I'm going to copy this down, right? And then substitute. So if you look at our key, not Q was true, or not S, if you look on your key, we found to be false, right? And then just like in algebra order of operations, we're going to do the parentheses first. So if you look on your chart, the disjunction of two false is going to produce a false statement. Copy this down. Whoops. That's supposed to be and. And then the disjunction of a true or false, that's going to be true. So now we have a conjunction. Remember, conjunction, the only time it's true is if both of them are true. So therefore, our final truth value is we would get a false statement. I hope you found this video really helpful, and I want you to make sure that you check the description. I left links to also my online course if you're interested. I have chapter modules and quizzes and homeworks and step-by-step answer keys, and I have video lessons of those. So again, I left that link in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure that you also leave a comment so that if you want to also request any future videos, I'd be more than happy to make those. So I hope to see you soon.